Before you were born, in the chaos of the womb, friction ridges formed on your fingers. They weren't for unlocking phones, they were for grip. Today, we're looking at how that ancient evolutionary trait became the modern world's digital lock.
Hi, I'm Lena Moreau, molecular biologist turned digital forensics researcher, and this episode is called The Biology of Identity. We're going to walk from the fetal hand to the iris storm, to the rhythm of your heart, and then we'll ask the awkward question, what happens when those things become passwords?
So, we'll call what we do in biometrics digital biomimicry. Machines trying to copy what brains and bodies have been doing for millions of years, recognizing individuals by structure, by motion, by sound.
So we'll call what we do in biometrics digital biomimicry. Machines trying to copy what brains and bodies have been doing for millions of years, recognizing individuals by structure, by motion, by sound. Sounds poetic, right? But there's a tension there, a sort of quietly unsettling one. When your biology becomes a login method, permanence and surveillance ride along. And permanence, well, that has consequences.
Let's start small and very literal. Your fingerprints.
Fingerprints begin forming early in embryonic life. Around weeks 10 to 13 of gestation, the ridges start to appear. By roughly week 24, the dermoglyphs are generally fully formed. Why did nature give us these ridges? For grip and tactile sensitivity. Think of them as evolution's ergonomic tweak, not some premonition of smartphones.
But then, something almost magical happens. Genetics lays down broad pattern types, loops, whorls, arches, yet the tiny details, the minutiae, are sculpted by the fetal microenvironment. That's right. Position in the uterus, local blood flow, pressure against the uterine wall, tiny differences in nutrition, even the length of the umbilical cord. These micro-conditions get amplified into unique ridge endings and bifurcations. It's like a chaotic system in physics. Small initial changes become big visible differences later on.
And because of that, even identical twins, same DNA, end up with different fine-scale fingerprints. Broader similarities, yes, but the detailed maps differ.
People sometimes toss about a number like 1 in 64 billion to describe fingerprint uniqueness. That's a rule of thumb used in forensics to make a point about rarity, not a precise mathematical proof, but it communicates how small the overlap chance is.
There's another fact here that makes fingerprints seductive for security. Once the ridges form, they're largely permanent. They'll persist across your life, unless severe injury scars the dermal layer. Pause. Think about that for a second. A password you can change if it's stolen. A fingerprint you mostly can't. Okay, how do machines read fingerprints? There are optical sensors, capacitive sensors that sense tiny voltage differences, and newer ultrasonic sensors that map ridges in 3 dimensions. The image gets converted into minutia points, ridge endings, bifurcations, mapped as coordinates and orientations. That map becomes a template, not the raw image, and matching looks for geometric relationships between those minutia to accommodate rotation and partial prints.
Terms to know. False acceptance rate, how often an imposter is accepted. False rejection rate, how often the legit user is denied. Designers trade these off depending on whether they're building a phone unlock or a border checkpoint.
You see, to an algorithm, you're not a person. You're a constellation of ridge intersections, your fetal life rendered as a tiny star map pressed against glass. Let's move up from the fingers to the face, another biological billboard. Human brains have large cortical real estate tuned to faces. We read identity, emotion, trustworthiness, even health cues from faces almost instantly. Faces are social signals, evolved to be read by other brains. Faces combine genetic influences on bone structure, jaw, cheekbones, brow, with soft tissue, fat distribution, muscle tone, and environmental changes like nutrition or scars. So again, genes set the stage, development and life write the script.
Modern face recognition systems do what our brains do in a very clumsy and literal way. Older systems measured distances, eyes to nose to mouth. Modern systems use deep neural networks to map faces into high-dimensional vectors. The face becomes a point in a face space.
And phones that use Face ID aren't just taking photos. Many project infrared dots to create a 3D depth map, combining texture and shape to resist simple photo attacks.
Still, comparing how you recognize a friend at a glance to how an algorithm recognizes someone is instructive. We use immense context and awkward tolerance for occlusion, lighting, and expression. An algorithm needs lots of varied examples to learn invariances.
Now, eyes, the iris in particular, have their own story. Your iris isn't just colored tissue. It's a thin, contractile diaphragm composed of complex fibrous structures, crypts, furrows, rings, freckles. That texture is the target of iris recognition.
Iris patterns develop early and are largely stable from toddlerhood onward. They're hidden behind the cornea, making them less prone to surface wear than fingerprints. That combination, rich texture, stability, protected location, makes the iris a powerful biometric.
Technically, people talk about the trabecular meshwork and the iris stroma. For the purposes of recognition, it's the visible fibrous chaos in the iris stroma, the frozen storm pattern, that matters.
How do iris systems work? Near-infrared imaging, segmentation of inner and outer boundaries, normalization to an unwrapped texture, encoding into a compact binary iris code, and matching via bitwise comparisons like Hamming distance.
John Dogman's modeling suggested astronomical entropy in iris patterns, that the odds of a random match are vanishingly small. That's why iris recognition was once hailed as the gold standard in biometrics.
So those are the structural parts: the fingerprints, face, iris, what we might call anatomy as password. But identity isn't only static structures. It's also movement and rhythm. Let's move into physiology, the body in motion.
Gait analysis, recognizing someone by the way they walk, draws on biomechanics.
Your gait is shaped by bone lengths, joint angles, muscle and tendon properties, neuromuscular coordination, and the scars of past injuries. All of that affects stride length, cadence, arm swing, hip rotation, foot angle. Because gait is emergent from anatomy and control, it can identify people from behind or at a distance, which creates both utility and unease. Methods vary. Silhouette-based techniques build a gait energy image, basically an averaged silhouette across a stride cycle. Skeleton-based methods reconstruct joint trajectories with pose estimation. Hybrid methods, like Tri-Gait, fuse silhouette and skeleton and have shown recognition accuracies over the mid-90s on benchmark datasets.
And that accuracy, 94 to 96% under varied clothing and view conditions, means gait can be very effective, especially because cameras can capture it without anyone's cooperation.
But gait is also state-dependent. Put on heavy boots, carry a package, sprain an ankle, your gait changes, which is both a point of vulnerability and a potential for continuous authentication. Is this the same person wearing the device right now? Heartbeat biometrics, ECG, take us deeper into physiology. The heart's electrical conduction system, the SA node, AV node, bundle branches, produces characteristic ECG waveforms: P wave, QRS complex, T wave. Those waveform morphologies depend on heart size and orientation, chest anatomy, conduction pathway quirks, so they carry person-specific signatures. Researchers extract segment durations and amplitudes, PQRS, ST intervals, to build biometric templates.
A challenge: morphology changes with physiological state, rest versus post-exercise. But work like DPADA, personalized augmentation and domain adaptation, aims to be robust across these states and has shown high identification rates, around 98% in resting conditions, and strong robustness after exercise in published experiments.
One appealing property of ECG biometrics: liveness. If you measure a heartbeat in real time, you're measuring a living, beating organ, hard to spoof with a static recording without sophisticated replay detection.
Wearables might one day use ECG or PPG to continuously authenticate you, making sure the device stays on the intended body.
Then there are behavioral biometrics: keystroke dynamics, voice, touch gestures, mouse movements. These combine motor control and habit, dwell times, flight times, cadence, which can be surprisingly distinctive. Voice is shaped by vocal cord size, vocal tract shape, and habitual intonation. Systems analyze spectral features and format patterns. But voice is increasingly vulnerable to AI voice cloning. Short samples can now be used to generate convincing imitations.
Mouse movements and touchscreen gestures are unobtrusive ways to continually check who's using a machine. They're lower friction, but they can be recorded and replayed if an adversary is sophisticated enough. So, structural and functional biometrics give us a toolkit, but let's not be naively optimistic. The system has pathology. I like an immune metaphor here. Liveness detection is the immune surveillance of biometric systems. Spoofing is like pathogens. Data breaches are like genetic mutations inserted into the population. If a password is hacked, you change it. If your biometric template is leaked, what then? You can't change your fingers. A stark example: the 2015 breach of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. Over 21 million personnel records were stolen, including roughly 5.6 million fingerprint records. Those fingerprints can't simply be revoked and reissued like a password. When biometric templates leak, they can be used to attempt spoofing elsewhere, or to build long-lived identity profiles that persist even if you change phones or services. Spoofing, fingerprint spoofing, has been demonstrated using high-resolution latent lifts and molded fingers made of silicone or gelatin, gummy fingers, and early sensors were famously vulnerable. Manufacturers have added countermeasures: capacitance checks, temperature and pulse sensors, micro-texture analysis, multispectral imaging. But sophisticated attackers still find ways. Face systems were once beaten by printed photos and screen images. Modern systems use depth sensing and infrared and ask for micro-movements or involuntary responses. But that arms race continues. Deepfakes are the next chapter. Deepfakes are essentially molecular mimics in this analogy. AI creates faces or voices that look and sound like self, making it possible to slip past surface defenses if a system only checks texture or a single modality. Gait can be hard to fake consistently, but actors can train, props can alter signatures, and targeted adversaries could try to imitate another's walk. Behavioral patterns can be recorded and replayed in certain contexts. So the immune system of biometrics liveness detection has to get clever. For face, active liveness asks you to blink, turn, or follow a challenge. Passive liveness analyzes microtexture and involuntary micro-movements. For fingerprints, liveness can mean checking perspiration over seconds, sensing electrical conductivity, or using multispectral imaging to see under the surface. For the eye, pupil response to light and microsaccades help detect fakes. For ECG, liveness is inherent. A recorded waveform lacks the natural variability and noise of a living heart, unless you do a very good spoof. But liveness checks aren't perfect. They can be intrusive, reduce usability, and sometimes increase error rates, false rejections that frustrate legitimate users. There's a societal pathology too: surveillance and function creep. Cameras and cloud AI can stitch faces across systems, track people through cities, and identify participants in protests without consent. That's where the autoimmune analogy hurts. A system meant to protect can become a system that attacks citizens' privacy and their capacity to assemble, speak, or dissent. Without strong governance, biometric databases created for one purpose, say border control, can be repurposed for policing, commercial profiling, or social scoring. That's function creep. Questions we should ask:
Who owns your face print? Do you have a right to refuse to be scanned by a public camera network? Can you compel deletion of biometric templates collected about you?
Some technical defensives exist. Cryptographic approaches try to store transformed templates, hashes, or cancelable biometrics, so that if a template leaks, it's not directly usable elsewhere. Cancelable biometrics apply a reversible transformation to biometric data. If that transformed template is compromised, you can revoke it and enroll under a new transform, sort of like issuing a new password that's still linked to your body, but not literally your raw print. But cancelable systems come with trade-offs. You must ensure the transform preserves enough discriminatory power, and you must manage keys and revocations securely. And then there's the policy layer. Regulations, oversight, and limits on retention and cross-matching are crucial. The tech can help, but law and governance set the societal boundary conditions. Let's zoom out and put this in evolutionary context. For millions of years, organisms evolved systems to distinguish self from other. Immune cells checking molecular marks, brains recognizing faces and calls. We're now building machines that copy parts of that ancient machinery, outsourcing recognition to silicon and cloud models. Structural passwords, fingerprints, face geometry, iris texture are like phenotypic stamps, hard and persistent. Functional passwords, gait, ECG, typing rhythms are dynamic, sensitive to state. And then we get pathologies, deepfakes, spoofing, breaches, surveillance overreach. Our defenses, liveness detection, cryptography, regulation, are the immune and homeostatic responses of this new security organism. So, what should you, a curious listener, take away? First, next time you unlock your phone, remember, you used your biology. Second, permanence matters. A stolen password is inconvenient. A leaked biometric template is permanent in ways that matter, so we must treat that data with the highest care. Third, the threat model matters. Consumer devices balance usability and security differently than border control systems. Know the context in which your biometrics are used. By the way, one practical tip. Where possible, use multi-factor authentication. Combine something you are with something you know or something you have. Layers reduce the risk from any single compromise. But there are deeper ethical questions. If your body is becoming your password, what parts of yourself are you willing to share, and what parts should remain unscannable? I'll leave you with that nagging image. A fetus turning in amniotic fluid, fingers pressed against a warm wall, tiny ridges being amplified by random flows and pressures. And then, decades later, those same ridges pressed to a glass screen to unlock an intimate piece of your life. It's wondrous, it's practical, and it's a little unnerving. Thanks for joining me in this episode. If you liked this forensic stroll through biology and code, subscribe and tell a friend who likes the slightly unsettling intersection of nature and technology. And if you have questions or worries about where your biometric data lives, send them in. I'll try to unpack them in a future episode. Until then, stay curious and watch what your body is saying and who's listening.